It was morning, an ordinary day in Prince George's County, Maryland. But inside one home, something horrifying had happened. Margaret Craig, a 71-year-old mother, was murdered. Her body was cut into pieces, cooked on the grill, and then hidden in the basement. And the person behind it? Her daughter, Candace Craig, was the last one anyone would suspect. It wasn't just a murder. It tore an entire family apart. Did anger destroy a mother-daughter relationship? Or were darker secrets buried in the shadows? In Chapter 1 of the Grimm chapters, we will uncover the truth that has remained hidden from the world. The case of Margaret Craig all started with a missing person report. Margaret hadn't been seen in days. She wasn't answering calls. She hadn't shown up for her usual routine. And for someone as structured and dependable as Margaret, it was especially alarming. The first to notice were her colleagues at the Department of Environmental Resources. After retiring, she remained active and involved in the community. So, when she vanished without a word, concern quickly turned into fear. Soon, a welfare check was requested. Police went to her home in Prince George's County on the 27th of July, 2023. The air was heavy. The yard was still. There was nothing odd from the outside. Officers knocked on the door and waited a few minutes before entering. It was apparent that something was not right. The house was strangely quiet. Inside, there were signs that Margaret hadn't just left. She had disappeared without taking anything meaningful with her. Then came the smell. Faint at first. But with every step toward the basement, it grew stronger, heavier, and undeniable. And that's when the unimaginable was found. In the basement, hidden in trash bags, beneath layers of cleaning products and towels, were human remains dismembered, wrapped, and stuffed in plastic. The smell wasn't food gone bad. It was death, decomposing, hidden, but not well enough. The investigators froze, and it was no longer just a missing person. It wasn't just a crime scene. It was preserved like someone wanted the horror to last. There were signs of burning, evidence that parts of the body had been cooked. Specifically, on an outdoor charcoal grill found in the backyard. No signs of panic, no rush. Every move was methodical. The body was being disposed of one piece at a time. As officers began moving through other parts of the house, Margaret's daughter, Candace, appeared, calm and composed. When asked about her mother, she told officers that her mother had gone out of town. But the truth was buried in the basement, and the horror was only just beginning. And in one corner of the house, another secret was hidden. A young woman, watching everything silently, Margaret's granddaughter, Salia Hardy. The officers who entered the basement of Margaret Craig's home in Maryland had a gruesome surprise waiting. But that's what they discovered. Human remains in trash bags, bloody floors, and a stench that would follow them for days. The basement wasn't just a crime scene, it was a horror show. But the deeper they dug, the more disturbing it got. They finally got a chilling clue in the backyard. A charcoal grill with ashes still warm. Inside it, partially burned human flesh. Candace didn't just cover up the crime. She attempted to obliterate evidence in the ghastliest of fashions. What was most disturbing was that Candace did not act alone. Her 19-year-old daughter, Salia Hardy, was also present, and investigators say she played a shocking role. Salia helped Candace pick up the dismembered remains, double-bag them in plastic, and even carried them out to the backyard grill. Detectives say she assisted in burning parts of her grandmother's body, a disturbing act carried out in horrifying silence. Whether she was manipulated, pressured, or simply compliant, one thing was clear: not just a solo crime, it was a twisted family effort to erase Margaret Craig from existence. At the precinct, Candace changed her story once more and accused her mother of assaulting her. However, an autopsy disproved that. No defensive wounds, only signs of post-mortem dismemberment. 2 weeks earlier, neighbors discussed a strange smell, like something cooking, but not food. Candace faced charges of first-degree murder and abuse of a corpse. Salia was accused of aiding and abetting in the cover-up. But silence, more than anything else, caught the attention of investigators. Neither cried, neither explained. They just stared, as if the truth had been sitting in that house forever, waiting to be found. Margaret Craig was a mother, friend, and neighbor long before she ever became a person of interest in a murder investigation. She was a peaceful spirit with a talent for her craft, and most of all, her children. Margaret was employed at the Prince George's County Department of Environmental Resources, but she was the one they never had to pick up for. She always managed to show up without ever causing any problems. Neither has she drifted off stage since stepping down. Instead, she stayed connected to her church community, pitched in for needy neighbors when she could, and loved those closest to her, including one daughter above all, Candace. But all was not as it appeared with that mother-daughter relationship behind closed doors. For years, Candace was described as a close friend of Margaret, who had helped and supported her while she was experiencing significant personal turbulence, financial troubles, mental health concerns. In some cases, this even extends to past encounters with the law. Still, Margaret never left. She welcomed Candace with open arms, filled in the blanks when they were most desperately needed, and, more importantly, loved her throughout everything. Only, it probably also came at a price. Friends of the family described Margaret as coming across as weary, worn down, almost weightless, as if she had been carrying not just her baggage but Candace's burdens. They felt like she always had to walk on eggshells around Candace so as not to catch her in a bad mood, and Candace could be just as fickle, warm one minute, callous the next. Still, Margaret never gave up. Perhaps because she was a mother. Maybe it was because she still thought that, against all odds, her daughter could be healed. Never in her wildest dreams did she think that one day it would not only be her daughter, but her granddaughter, Salaya, who would listen silently as the unimaginable took place. There were no cries for help, just errands, a phone call, a normal day. And then silence. To understand what made a person like Candace Craig capable of killing her mother in such a repugnant way, we need to look closely and attempt to see Candace not only as the accused murderer, but also as a woman whose whole existence was defined by one tragic event after another over many years. Living with her was like walking through a minefield. One wrong word, one small mistake, and everything could explode. Margaret gave her money and love, and even forced her into therapy whenever she thought it might help. But Candace resisted help. She wanted control, not guidance, and Salia, raised in the shadow of her mother, never voiced her own mental and emotional struggles. She quietly stayed in her place as darkness grew inside the home. Later, investigators would find journal entries and Google searches on Candace's devices about how a freshly killed human body decomposes, how to destroy flesh from bones, and how to remove organs from a body. These weren't random clicks. There were plans. The fact of the matter is, Candace had been falling apart for a while. It wasn't a sudden snap, just a long time coming. A slow-burning fuse. Candace's mind had become a prison of resentment and delusion, and Margaret was her only jailer. Or so she thought. By the time anyone realized how dark things had become, it was already too late, and what Candace did next shocked even the most experienced investigator. Candace looked calm when the police first arrested her. No tears, no confusion, not warm, calm, but cold. But the walls were closing in. Candace didn't realize every word she spoke was digging her deeper. Despite everything, she kept repeating the same story. But under pressure, the cracks began to show. Investigators started putting the pieces together, and what they uncovered was far darker than she claimed. Forensic evidence told a darker story. Margaret never fought back. No wounds, no struggle. Her body was dismembered after death, then burned with chilling precision. Candace eventually admitted to trying to dispose of the body. In panic, she thought burning it would make it all go away, a desperate attempt to hide the crime, not defend herself. What disturbed the detectives most? She never showed an ounce of guilt, never asked what would happen next. She spoke about it like she was describing a normal routine, calm, detached, cold. In the end, it wasn't just murder. She had dismembered her mother, grilled the remains, like it were just another task to finish. Cold, calculated, inhuman. But the question that haunted everyone was simple. Why? This wasn't panic. It wasn't spontaneous. It was step by step, cold, silent, and methodical. For what purpose? To destroy evidence? Or something more unthinkable? The event was not consumed, one friend said. However, the action itself caused even veteran officers to feel a wave of nausea. Nothing he had seen before, but more horror awaited inside the house. Jars of bleach, gloves, and scrubbing devices were throughout the place, a weak attempt to restore the damaged site. But something proved that some secrets were too great to hide. Nor was it that detectives experienced a chill, the savagery. It was the calculated silence. No forced entry, no cries for help. One woman systematically killed her mom. The timeline was equally disturbing. It was days before anyone noticed Margaret was dead. Meanwhile, Candace had been sharing the home, sleeping there, eating there, and just sitting on her phone. When she killed her mother, she was down in the basement. There was no panic, no remorse, only a horrifying calm. That suggests this notion should not be rushed. It was planned, it was deliberate, and it was evil. As the investigators pieced together the horrifying evidence, a pressing question emerged. What could drive a daughter to commit such a brutal crime against her mother? The question now is, what would bring a daughter to kill her mother? Prosecutors say the motive was money, specifically fraud. Margaret reportedly learned weeks before the murder that Candace was pretending to be her to steal money. Credit cards, fake transactions. According to investigators, Margaret had nearly reached her limit. She had discovered the fraud and was ready to call the police. She went so far as to say that she was going to report her daughter to the police. That was the breaking point for her. Investigators suspect Candace murdered her mother to silence her, to shield herself from a possible prison sentence. But that was just the surface, a small part of a deeper storm made of selfishness, anger, and severe mental instability. In Candace's eyes, her mother wasn't a parent. She was a problem. Someone is blocking her movements now. Margaret was no longer a mother in her thinking, a concept that had become a threat. In that one selfish yet survival moment, Candace chose a path that would ultimately destroy them both. It wasn't just about money. It was about power. And her attitude, that she could never make a mistake. Candace Craig was arrested at the scene when the remains were discovered. She was charged as an adult with first-degree murder and unauthorized disposal of a human corpse. When Candace faced a judge for the first time, the courtroom went deadly silent. She showed no emotion, no tears, only that same cold, distant look of a person who had not adjusted to the fact, or maybe didn't care. Prosecutors described in detail how Margaret's body was cut into pieces, cooked, and hidden. They also explained how Candace tried to cover it up by using bleach and lying. The judge refused bail. Candace had to stay in jail while the case went on. At the same time, the community was shocked, scared, and shaken beyond belief, as were people who had lived next door to Margaret and Candace for decades. People heard strange noises and bad smells, but no one ever thought it was a murder. Margaret Craig was a kind and quiet woman. It was hard to believe that her daughter not only killed her, but also burned her body in the backyard. The news spread like wildfire through local media. Then, before too long, it became national news. Beneath the headlines, though, lay an uglier legacy. A family decimated by treachery and cruelty. No one saw it coming. Candace Craig is no longer awaiting trial. In November 2024, she was found guilty on all charges, and in February 2025, she was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. But behind her, in silent court appearances and unseen reports, stood Salia Hardy, the daughter who didn't stop it, the one who watched and said nothing. Of course, no sentence, no court decision can reverse what has been done. Margaret Craig is dead, murdered, erased from the very person she spent her life protecting. And to all who knew, that is the final, darkest insult of all.